our conversation today with Congressman Jeff Fortenberry. What a 24, 48, 72. I mean, what a last 12 hours it has been between the tensions between Ukraine and Russia. Congressman Fortenberry joining us live today from Washington, D.C. Congressman, if we could just reset the last 12 to 18 hours, what has it been like in our nation's capital?
Well, I'm actually in Nebraska today, Bill, but nonetheless, this is jarring for the nation. It's jarring for the entire world. Putin is unhinged. The Ukrainians must now fight. Europe has to awaken from its slumber. It is almost unimaginable that in this day and time, while Russia was presiding over the United Nations Security Council, that they simultaneously launched an attack on a sovereign nation. It is undermining the conditions for order and sanity in the world, whereby we have a possibility for resolving conflicts. Russia has raised the Iron Curtain and they've lost all legitimacy on the international stage.
This is, from our understanding, really the first instance of a power invading another country in the last, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in the last 8 decades. I mean, maybe since the end of World War II. What does that say about the stage and the time that we're in right now?
This is the largest invasion since World War II, and it is reminiscent of a lot of Americans of a very painful time that we all thought may have been behind us. Remember, in the aftermath of World War II, a lot of international institutions were set in place to try to resolve conflict, to create orderly commerce, relations between people. And then in this new social media age, where we can almost instantaneously dialogue and even travel to places worldwide, we thought there would have been a more enlightened, developed understanding of the prospects for human dignity and the protection of sovereign national rights. So what Russia has done is rocked the world, literally, by this invasion. Again, it is a threat not only to Ukraine, but an entire system internationally in which we have been able to, very imperfectly, but find our ways to stop this type of aggression. So it's unprecedented in our modern time. In fact, we just got a call from a gentleman who fought in the Vietnam War. His heart is broken. 50 years ago, he went overseas to stop this type of authoritarian aggression, and he's seeing it unfold in our time again. I think the world fell asleep, thought this would be past us, but it has very much jarred us into reality now.
Congressman, I know you're in Nebraska right now, but I'm sure you're getting fairly real-time updates about what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in their capital of Kiev. What can you tell us about what you know is happening on the ground this morning and today?
Well, the problem is this is a first-stage military operation, and no one knows exactly where it's going. We will have a meeting, a bipartisan meeting by phone tonight with all Congress members for a briefing from key administration officials and the military. With that said, however, again, in this early stage, it's unclear whether Ukraine has enough military capacity, at least to hold off the Russians in some areas. It appears that they are in some areas. Russia is very likely to try to topple this government and install a new government, then participate in some sort of holding action and hope the world just moves on. This cannot become the new normal.
What do you envision the United States' role being over the next 2 to 3 days, 2 to 3 weeks? And do you believe the sanctions that President Biden has imposed recently are enough?
Well, frankly, I thought President Biden's address to the nation was scientific and uninspired, very technical in nature. However, with that said, I do agree with this leveling of new sanctions. It's one diplomatic, economic tool that we can actually move quickly on. Will it be enough? No, it wasn't enough to prevent this. Any conflict like this doesn't happen with a spark. It happens because wood and fuel has been added to a fire that's been simmering for a long time. The biggest part of this issue is energy. Europe has been very dependent upon Russian gas for a very long time now. Germany, one of the largest countries in Europe, very dependent on Russia. There were sanctions leveled a couple of years ago against this new Russian pipeline into Europe. And why this was important is it cuts off the flow of money to Russia. Without oil and gas revenue, Russia doesn't have the capacity to have a military buildup like this. So you have to have a new strategic thinking around energy. Just a year ago, we were energy independent. Now we're dependent again on foreign sources of oil and energy, going back to a made in America energy strategy, along with sanctions, along with compelling NATO to burden share more properly, particularly the country of Germany, are the medium term plays that we have to get to in order to stop this type of Russian aggression and push back.
I know this is thousands of miles away, but you talked about energy. Nebraskans, I'm sure, are thinking about energy, about oil, about gas, about trade, exports. How are Nebraskans going to be impacted in the short term and long term by this conflict and really what most are calling an act of war?
Gas prices and fertilizer prices, as these are realities, you're going to see jump in both. This is why we have to immediately go back to the previous policy of having an American-made energy strategy. Just months ago, just a year ago, we were completely independent in terms of our own energy production and positioned to help the rest of the world, like European countries, not be dependent on countries like Russia. This is energy is an important diplomatic tool. We've got the capacity. We just have to have the will to go back to it. And over the long term, obviously, transition to a more sustainable form of energy development in our country. But right now, American energy independence is a way we can protect citizens from rising prices and have better diplomatic leverage to stop the Russians.
Congressman, I'm seeing that you have signed on a letter urging President Biden to seek congressional approval before involving any troops. Why is that?
Because it was unclear to us as this was developing whether or not the Biden administration would front forward troops into Ukraine itself. I don't agree with that proposition. Ukraine is not a NATO member. Ukraine has struggled to build out capacity. I was very supportive of sending them lethal weaponry. I think that's helped create some capacity in the last few years. They've been able to gather some type of nationalistic will, if you will, and build out a better military. That's why they're somewhat resisting the Russians. I don't think they can fully hold out, but they have put up some resistance, and that's been important. But to put U.S. troops there, no, I don't think Americans want that. I don't think Nebraskans want that, and I don't stand for that. However, we do need to do everything we can to push our NATO allies to actually strengthen their own reserve components, to burden share more fairly with America, but at the same time, unify our coalition so that we have a united stand against any further Russian incursion.
We've seen a statement from Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse urging the Defense Department to help weaponize Ukraine, to get more arms to Ukraine. Do you agree with that?
Yes, we have been doing that for several years, but an enhanced arming of Ukrainians with the capacity that they may have left in the next few years. Again, this is an early stage of a war, and it's not clear where it's going. They seem to be able to be fighting the Russians successfully in a few places, unsuccessfully in others. So it's unclear how this war is going to develop. But that's something, yes, I have been supportive and will continue to support. It's something that we can do that I think Americans will stand behind. It also prevents this spilling over more rapidly into NATO-aligned countries. But with that said, again, Germany and the other NATO countries have to do more than burden share. It is with their burden sharing. It is unfair to ask American young men and women to go to Europe potentially and die when European young men and women won't do the same.
You know, it's hard for a lot of people to get past the fact of imagining Russia, a great power, invading another country and not harken back to the days of the Cold War and the potential of nuclear, maybe not weapons, but just nuclear sources being used. I understand you're the founder of the Nuclear Security Working Group. Can you explain the fears that Americans have and then how this working group could play a role?
Yeah, a little bit of history, if you will. After the Cold War, after the Iron Curtain fell in the 1990s, America and the West really had a very big opportunity to move from mutually assured destruction with the Russians, the former Soviet Union, to mutually assured security. That whole transition basically was blown. We moved on. They struggled economically. A strong man named Putin comes along, revives the Russian nationalistic myth. He now has revenues from his oil and gas production to build up a military and flex his might and call for a regeneration, if you will, of the old Soviet empire. That's what's going on here. In the meanwhile, Russia has nuclear weapons that could kill us all in an instant. We have enough nuclear weapons that could kill them in an instance. China is on the rise in this regard, as are other countries. There has to be a better way to get us off of the precipice of what is the unthinkable of an actual nuclear exchange that wipes out humanity and civilization itself. And it could happen in an instance. So in Congress, I formed the Nuclear Security Working Group, particularly because of this concern, but also the fact that I represent Offutt Air Force Base, which houses Strategic Command, our nuclear policy, our nuclear weapons nerve center. These are incredibly dedicated men and women to that command. You don't hear much about it because it's not necessary to hear much about it. They are on top of this. They know what to do to create the conditions in which the unthinkable doesn't happen. They effectively exist. Our nuclear weapons effectively exist as a deterrent from them ever being used. But in Congress, there's very little consideration of this because there's really no constituency for it. So we worked actively to try to engage at a lot of level to lower the possibility to as close to zero that there could be a nuclear exchange or loose nuclear material, and also to create diplomatic channels, even with the Russians, so that we can begin to talk again. Once all this settles, hopefully, in an ideal sense, Putin would pull back. I doubt that's going to happen. But at some point, there has to be a reviving of authentic diplomatic dialogue backed up by security guarantees and strength in order to get us away from the edge of what is really the unimaginable.
You said once all this settles, I mean, I know it's early, we're 18 hours into this, but what do you envision as a path toward peace right now?
I don't envision a path toward peace right now because it is so disturbing and so jarring what has happened. I imagine Putin is going to take over the entire country, install a new government, declare that there is a new Ukraine. The new government will be a puppet government of Russia, perhaps over time as the military threat to them or no insurgency rises against them, they may pull back some of their troops. But it becomes another Soviet or another Russian satellite, if you will. A country that really is the hinge between the East and the West. Half of Ukraine inclines toward Europe, the other half inclines more toward Russia. And that's why it's been an interesting and necessary buffer between East and West. But it's a blown possibility now that Ukraine could maintain this semblance of balance between both worlds. It's effectively taken over by Russia.
Congressman, again, I really appreciate your time today. I'll leave you with this one. What do Nebraskans, thousands of miles away from this conflict, what do we in Nebraska need to know?
Well, for more senior Nebraskans, obviously, it evokes the memory of the Cold War. For some Nebraskans, it evokes the memory of World War II. The unimaginable horror and slaughter of tens of millions of people is still an active memory in the lifetime of a lot of Nebraskans. Others remember the Cold War, in which we were all on edge, whether or not we knew there was going to be a nuclear exchange in any moment, had to live in that fear. Again, I think we got lulled to sleep with the fall of the Soviet Union and didn't take the necessary measures, again, to move from mutually assured destruction to mutually assured security, respecting other people's autonomy and culture and ethnicity, and yet at the same time trying to work more aggressively toward a stabilized, peaceful understanding of how to coexist. Thus, we find ourselves in this difficult position with the idea, the prospects, the horrific memories of the past being a real possibility presented to us in this real time. The other thing that has changed is the technological sophistication of weaponry. Again, so much more lethal than we used to have. It's a very dangerous situation for Europe particularly. And even though we're thousands of miles away, I'm fearful we're going to feel the effects if we don't move quickly, particularly toward American energy independence, which will then strengthen our diplomatic options as well.
Congressman Fortenberry joining us live today. Congressman, anything else you want to add?
No, other than, again, I have my own children, and one of them texted me, "Dad, I'm scared." Sometimes we can use the fear that comes up in our hearts to actually start to think more critically, not to simply sleepwalk through our day. Most people are concerned about raising their families and just working hard to get ahead, and that's what they should be concerned about. But policymakers have to do a much better job of creating a new paradigm construct for peaceful interactions around the world. This cannot become the new norm. Just because a country has the weaponry and their neighbor is weak, this cannot become a new norm that they can just invade with tanks, kill civilians, and set up new governments. And yet we're seeing it, and it's almost unthinkable. We'll have to continue to unpack the fullness of solutions in the coming days.
Congressman, thank you for your time.